it really please hold time already? These are coming up faster and faster, aren't they?
It was last weekend. I wasn't going to work because I'm like, it's the first weekend of October. I have to be ready for Dave. And I'm like, wait, no. The first is after Thursday, so I still got a week.
Yeah. And still, it's right here. How I expected to open was, we begin, I hope, with a phone message from Jeff Seiler. Obviously, we most likely aren't now. Yes, this is our first Please Hold for Dave Sim without our traditional Jeff Seiler question leading off. I figured we're mostly just going to be remembering Jeff, but one guy who did send in questions is somebody who we couldn't do Please Hold for Dave Sim without Michael R. from Easton, Pennsylvania. Yes, so we'll get to Michael's question. I wanted to ask you, have you heard anything from Minneapolis or your contacts there? You said that there wasn't even an obituary.
I've been looking and I have not found one yet. Somebody on Jeff's Facebook that went to Oral Roberts University with him said, had posted going, did anybody hear anything? And I commented saying, I haven't heard anything, but you know, if anybody hears anything, let us know. And that's all I've heard. I haven't heard anything from anybody in Minneapolis yet.
Okay, all right.
It's my new.
Go ahead.
It's my new. How did I phrase it to my dad? My new understanding of hell is I have to answer the phone every time it rings because I don't know if this is going to be a call about Jeff from somewhere in the world or if it's a spam call. And every single time it's a spam call.
Okay. Yeah, there you go. That's 21st century hell right there. Okay, I was gonna ask you, when Jeff was living in Wisconsin, how long was he living there, and how far was he from you guys?
I don't remember how long. I think it was about a year. And then his prospects dried up and he got an invitation to come move to Minneapolis where it'd be cheaper. But he lived in Manitowoc, which is 7 miles from my house. It's the next town over. What had happened is for the people that don't know, Jeff met a girl through Dave, which is one of those things that sounds like a good idea if you're a Cerebus fan, and sounds like a really bad idea if you're Dave Sim.
Yeah, I'll qualify that one that he didn't okay, but you keep going with the story, and then I'll check some bits in as well.
So what had happened was there was a teacher in Canada who used Judenhaus in her classroom and wrote a letter to Dave saying I did this, and had all the kids write letters to Dave, basically discussing Judenhaus. And Dave kindly responded to all the letters and corrected all the grammar, and grammar mispronunciation or misspellings, and there instead of there, which makes a lot more sense if you're reading this.
Oh, I forgot that part. Thank you.
And
Keep going.
And then because Jeff was in the beginnings of proofreading, because he had discussed proofreading with you, specifically he had sent 60 pages of Collected Letters Volume 1 hand-corrected, that he had took the book, hand-corrected the pages, ripped them out, and then mailed them to you before you said, Jeff, please knock it off.
Right.
So you forwarded all these letters to Jeff as a, hey, did I do okay, or something to that effect. And Jeff was able to pierce together who this lady was and what school she was at, and sent a letter because there was another teacher that Jeff knew that did the same thing with Judenhaus, and basically just wanted to say, hey, this is an idea, and I like how you did it, this is how this other guy did it. And they started writing letters to each other, and then they started talking on the phone, And then she said, come live with me in Canada, and Jeff said, okay.
Right. I will interrupt at that point and say, I did tell Jeff, you don't want to be hooking up through something relating to the Holocaust. Because this teacher, yeah, she did kind of the same thing with me and said, I really appreciate what you did for my class, and we are going to be going to Stratford, Ontario, where they have the Shakespeare Festival. And would you be interested in being my guest with my class at the Shakespeare Festival? And I politely declined because it just seemed weird to me. It was fine to have dealings with a teacher about UNOS and with her class about UNOS, but that was starting to sound too much like a Holocaust date. So I was very emphatic with Jeff. You do not want to hook up with somebody through the Holocaust. So back to you again.
So Jeff, because he was living in, I can't remember if he was still in Texas or if he had moved to Nebraska or Missouri, but he was living further south than me. So since I was on the way to Canada, he stopped by to say, hey, can I stay at your place for the night, and I'll a quick little visit. And he explained about what's going on, and okay, I'm moving to Canada, and I'm like, okay. Like, he had gotten rid of everything he owned except for what fit in his minivan.
I forgot that part.
And
okay.
So all his worldly possessions are in his van, and he's going to Canada to meet this woman that he's never seen. She sent pictures and stuff, but like he's never seen her in person before.
Right.
And he gets to the border, and they say, purpose of your visit, business or pleasure, and he says, I'm moving here, which is a much different response than what the border guards were expecting, and they don't look at your passport like they look at your passport if you're visiting when you say you're moving here. That starts a whole new ball of wax. And one of the rules in Canada is you can't come in if you have a DUI or an OUI on your record going back 10 years. And Jeff had a DUI.
Yeah.
So now Jeff can't move to Canada because he's not allowed in for 10 years after the date. And I think it was 14 months before he would be able to get in. So he convinced the Border Patrol to let him come in for 2 weeks so that he could go to her place, unload his van, explain the situation, lived there for 2 weeks, and then had to come back. So he established himself in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. And he called me to say, hey, I couldn't get into Canada. And I'm like, well, what did you do? And he's like, well, I showed up at the border with my van full of everything I owned, including furniture, and said, I'm moving to Canada. And I said, what, are you stupid? You don't do that. And he went, so what? I'm like, haven't you ever seen Hogan's Heroes? You don't sneak everybody out of the camp the first day. You gotta slowly get into it. And he laughed so hard, he's like, repeat that again so I can write it down.
Right.
So he had the 2 weeks.
Imperfect analogy, but funny, and kind of related to the Holocaust again.
Well, and I forgot about the whole that he met her through the Holocaust things. And when I said it, it was just a, hey, no, you don't sneak everybody out of the camp at once. And now that we're talking about it, that kind of fits the through line for, hey, Jeff, don't date somebody you met through the Holocaust.
Right. Right. So this is what I call metaphysics, where all of these things resonate through this. So keep going. So
Jeff's in Michigan. She comes to visit, but it's like an hour and a half or 2 hour drive one way from her place. But she's coming on the weekends fairly frequently, and then sort of not so frequently. And every time she shows up, they're together, but she's kind of pissed off about her personal life back in Canada. She's got a couple of kids that she's having problems with. And then, with like 2 months to go before Jeff's going to get sprung and be allowed into Canada, she doesn't show up when she's supposed to, and he can't get a hold of her. And when he finally does, it's, oh, I'm not coming. I'm breaking up with you. Oh, in the meantime, during the 2 weeks that he was in Canada, she took him to Toronto to talk to an immigration lawyer and paid the retainer, which was like $2,500, I think?
Something like that.
I mean, it was not pocket change. It was not, hey, I can afford the Cerebus stuffed toy money. It was a significant amount of money.
Yes.
And
a significant drive. If you don't know the distance between Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, and Toronto, that's kind of a commitment as well.
And so during the 12 months Jeff's in Michigan and she's coming to visit, she's paying money to the lawyer, and the lawyer is, doing what they can to fix things. Like Jeff had a traffic violation in Connecticut, and he had to get it taken care of before they'd let him in. And so he contacted Connecticut, and Connecticut had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah, keep going.
So then she finally, because she's given him all this money, and he's not asking. She's just, oh, okay, I'll pay for that. Oh, okay, I'll pay for that. But then when she shows up, they're having fights about money because you just want me for my money. And he's like, no, I don't. I have offered to pay numerous times, and you refuse every single time. And so finally she breaks up with him, and it turns out that she's got a friend named Wally. And the only reason I remember this is because this story was going to be in Cerebus Readers in Crisis number 5. And Jeff had written it up, and I said, I will draw it. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, but what he had given me, there were some typographical errors. It didn't read like Jeff, is the best way I can put it. Like, he repeats himself a couple times. It was not polished and finished. And I'm like, do you want to go over this once more? And Jeff said, oh, yeah, okay. And then I hadn't ever gotten anything from him. But the reason the name Wally sits in my mind is because when he told me about it, I'm like, okay, so Cowboy Wally. And he was like, what? I'm like, Cowboy Wally. Have you ever read the graphic novel by Kyle Baker? And he's like, no. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, find a copy, you'll understand. Because in my head, in the story, whenever Wally shows up, I'm just going to trace Kyle Baker's Cowboy Wally, and that's the guy she's dating. So her friend Wally, it turns out, is more than a friend. And basically she was dumping Jeff for him, and Jeff, I mean, a lot of this is supposition on Jeff's part that he told me, but this is what Jeff believed, was that, that Wally put the moves on her and stole her away. So Jeff basically, he's in Michigan for no reason, because now she's not even coming to visit. So he comes to visit me, and okay, shows up at my apartment, comes in, sits on the couch, and says, I'm moving here. And I looked at Paula and went, okay. And Paula looked at me like, not our place. And I had to find a real polite way of telling Jeff, you can stay the weekend, but come Monday, you gotta find a spot. So I helped him find his first apartment, which it turns out was one of the most expensive apartment complexes in the county. If I had known that, I wouldn't have sent him there. And he lived there for a while. And then he moved to a place downtown in Manitowoc, which was a block away from the strip club where he had his fun adventure.
Right.
And he lived there for a while, and then things weren't going good. He couldn't find a job. He had gotten another DUI at the strip club. And
which was the Cerebus Readers in Crisis story.
Oh yeah, that was when he told me the story for that. I'm like, so is this the end of the first story, or is this the second story? Because it kind of sounds like it's both.
Right.
The short answer is, or the short version of the story is, Jeff's at the strip club. His bartender's name is Larceny, and she swears that her brother's name is Justice.
Right. I forgot that part too. that's really resonant stuff.
So Jeff has a couple of drinks, watches a couple of dances, decides to go home. He has had a few beers. Like this isn't sober Jeff going home. This is Jeff with a little bit of a nod on. And he gets in his van, pulls out of the parking lot, and the strip club's on a corner. The east-west street is both ways, but the north-south street, if you turn north, is one way going south. At the intersection, it becomes two-way, further south of the intersection. So Jeff pulls out, heading west, is immediately at the stoplight, and as he gets on the road, there's immediately a cop car behind him. And he panicked and immediately turned right to get out of the way of the cop car, which didn't have its lights and sirens on it just was behind him, and turned right onto a one-way going the wrong way.
A criminal mastermind.
So the police officer whose lights were off suddenly had his lights on, and Jeff's telling me this, going, well, you know where the club is, right? I'm like, yeah, so let me guess. You got a tour of the police station and the county jail and the courthouse, right? And he's like, yeah. I'm like, and they're all within a block of the strip club, aren't they? And he's like, yeah. Because the police station is a block north of the strip club. The jail and the courthouse are a block east. And it was one of those, yep, okay, you're not driving it, because he didn't below zero, so you're coming with us. Took him a block, booked him, took him 2 blocks, put him in jail for the night. And he called me the next day to say, hey, this is what happened. And I'm going, what were you thinking? So, of course,
there was a lot of thinking to it.
So he gets another DUI, which means he can't go to Canada for another 10 years.
Right.
And in the meantime, she has contacted him saying, come get your crap. So there was a 2-week period. There's a 2-week period where he hasn't been sentenced yet, so he can get into Canada for 2 weeks. So that's when he came to visit you, and on the way back, swing by her place and get all his stuff. And she had said, I don't want you here, but I don't want to see you, but I don't lock my doors, so you can just come in and get whatever. And he's telling me that, and I'm going, so you brought somebody with you? No. What if she had answered the door with a shotgun, Jeff? Well, I didn't think of that, Matt.
Right. I can jump in at this point and say, yes, Jeff phoned to tell me that this was the situation, and can he come by for a visit at the Off-White House? And it's like, yeah, don't really see the logistics on that, but if that's what you want to do, this was definitely a relationship that really consumed him. I would say relationship in quotation marks, but definitely he was all in on this, which is another one of those bad resonances with the Holocaust. Whatever situation you're in going into this, you're not going to be in that same situation coming out of this. And I remember he came here, and it's like, well, okay, not a lot of people get to visit Dave and the Off-White House. What do you want to see? And the first thing that he wanted to see was anything that I had in the correspondence files from this Canadian teacher. It's like, oh man, there but for the grace of God go I.
I should footnote here for the audience at home who are going, he what? When Jeff was communicating with her, she said that she had been writing letters to Dave until Dave basically said, please stop, and got, quote, according to her, mean, and wrote a letter that offended her so badly that she set fire to all the letters that Dave had sent her. And
I forgot that part too, yes.
And Jeff, being Jeff, was, what could Dave have said that would have made her set them on fire? To which I say, well, Jeff, depends on how strongly she didn't understand what the word no meant.
Right. Okay, so
the first thing Jeff wanted was the letters, and you said,
basically I said, well, you'd have to narrow it down a little bit. I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of when all of these things are taking place. They're kind of incidental to my own life, and it's like he knew pretty much when it would have been happening, and it's like, okay, I pulled out those correspondence boxes and started going through them and went, yeah, here's an 8-page letter, here's a 7-page letter, and Jeff sat down and read them, and it's like, this has come to an end. This is probably not something you should even be vaguely interested in, but there you go. It's there's the letters. She was just one of those on and on and on about whatever it was, and me going, this is in a completely different category from the professional interaction that we were having, which was, can I teach your graphic novel Udenhof to my class? And I went, yes, by all means, no problem. I think I even sent her a class size set so that everybody could have their own copy.
that was, as when I describe Jeff to people, and I'll be talking about my friend Jeff, and people are like, well, what do you mean? What's he like? I'm like, for every story Jeff had that ended with, and that's how I got front row center at the Rolling Stones, there's 2 stories that end with, and that's why I called you for bail money.
Yeah. I mean, cruel but fair.
I'm going to miss him horribly. I mean, we didn't talk often, but when we did, it was always, worth it. That's the best way I can put it. After we moved to Minneapolis, we only talked a handful of times, but every single time he called me, it was one of these, I'll take an hour to talk to Jeff.
Yes, unquestionably. I mean, he had this extensive background in so many different areas that it really didn't matter what you were talking to Jeff about on the phone. He'd have something interesting and relevant to say about it.
I mean, that's the Rolling Stone story is where we said, you need to write these down and do a comic, and he went, what? And we're like, the stories you're telling us, you need to turn into a comic book. This is entertaining. And of course, the first story he chose was the first night he needed bail, and that became Cerebus Readers in Crisis #1.
Yeah, that was one of the regrets that I got is on my list of things to talk to Jeff about was, do you still have the digital files for Cerebus Readers in Crisis? So that at least, maybe even just print on demand, we could do a collection of Cerebus Readers in Crisis. And I regretted that he didn't keep going with that, because speaking as the sort of epicenter of Cerebus Readers, they do have a predilection for very interesting crises in their lives. Wouldn't you say that that's an accurate description?
Yes. I mean, the year that I didn't get to go to S.P.A.C.E. because Paul and I bought tickets on the discount airline that disappeared when we got to the airport. By the time we got to my aunt's place where we were spending the night because we weren't going to Columbus, I went, yeah, this is a Cerebus Readers in Crisis. I can see all the mistakes I made in the order I made them.
Right. And there you are.
And that was why I'm in issue 4.
Yeah.
And then I I want to say he had to have digital files that he'd given to the various contributors of their stories. Because I think Steve Peters has a copy of his.
Right.
But that's when and if I get a hold of anybody and find out what's happening with Jeff and his estate, I'm going to say, this is a project Jeff worked on. If you have no interest in it, I would like the rights, Jeff's share of the rights, just so we can do a collection and get it out there, because that's what he was working on the past how many years.
Right.
He didn't think he was going to get number 5 done before he got the collection done.
Right. Yeah, that brings up an interesting question, which is, I think we... A Moment of Cerebus and Cerebus fandom really had the lion's share of Jeff's attention after he retired, but absolutely no legal claim. I mean, this is where his heart and soul was, and I think there are more people here who are concerned about Jeff and concerned about Jeff's memory, but in the real world, that just doesn't wash. It's family having priority over everything else. So the fact that Jeff died intestate, whatever you can manage to find out, and whatever contact you can have in Minneapolis with the people who really have genuine participation in this, is going to be completely on their good grace, whatever we even find out about what's going on. And I think that's just one of those, everything's baked in that way. And, people listening, it's an arduous process. Once Jeff actually started down the road of starting to put a last will and testament together, you just find out how completely complicated your life is when you don't think of yourself as having a particularly complicated life. He got I think it was a PBS pledge thing, a 95-page, count them, 95-page how to put together your last will and testament with, multiple choice questions. And I think he got all the way through that and was actually going through all of his possessions and just realizing, I mean, the lawyer said, he was dragging his feet on getting the will put together. But I don't think it was so much that he was dragging his feet, is that there was just so much that he had to do once he started looking at everything that he had. Excuse me. One of the first things was he had storage at his apartment building, and he went down to the storage. He had like three sections of the storage unit, and all of the storage had been broken into. All of the padlocks had been broken off of each storage unit, and somebody had been living down there. Someone had gone through everybody's possessions and taken what they wanted to take, and was theoretically living there while they were doing it. When I heard that, I went, I'm not sure that isn't a cover story, that whoever did it was an inside job, and they tried to make it look like a homeless person was living down there and stealing everybody's stuff. X number of things that Jeff had were missing. There were some rare books that he had down there, but with his bad hip and everything else like that, he still had to move most of his stuff back up to his apartment. while he waited for the storage lockers to be made whole again. And it's like that was another one of those Jeff Seiler stories. This could only happen to Jeff Seiler. So I don't think that there's too much that any of us can do, but I'm sure Jeff appreciates the efforts that you're making, trying to stay in touch with this, with the people in Minneapolis and the lawyer there.
I'm gonna try calling the lawyer and the building super. Those are the only two numbers I got. The name of his presumed executor was Aaron Cole, but he never gave me Aaron's number, so I can't get a hold of him. And I think the last time he called me, I missed the call because I was doing something, and I didn't call him back right away because it was late at night. And then when I did get a hold of him the next day, he had been out to the movies, and he couldn't remember why he called me. And I'm like, well, you said it was something about more information for me. And he went, okay, well, I'm like, if you can't talk, just text. Because that was one of Jeff's problems near the end, was that speech was difficult.
Yeah, he was having such difficulty breathing most of the time that talking wasn't helping him.
So I'm planning on, once I get the podcast up on the internet, I'm going to share a link to it on Jeff's Facebook page. So hopefully people that know Jeff can listen to this and listen to us reminisce about Jeff. And if they know anything, they can get a hold of me through the podcast.
Right. I think at least for the foreseeable future with Please Hold for Dave Sims, since we don't have Jeff Seiler's questions to kick around anymore, paraphrasing Richard Nixon, what we'll do is we'll lead off each Please Hold for Dave Sims with Jeff Seiler recollected, and we'll try and update people on whatever's going on with the Jeff Seiler estate if we can find out about it. I think you can at least get that from the lawyer. I mean, lawyers are obviously very sticky about what they're allowed to tell anybody about anything, but I think it would be no problem for her to give you, here's what the public record has of the progress on Jeff Seiler's estate, because everything has to be done by the book, according to Minneapolis, Minnesota law, and we'll at the very least we'll be able to let people know what's happening with that.
Right.